Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York, Brighupada Dasa. Welcome to the show, everybody. Welcome to Sleeping Sunday. Sleeping Sunday, you get a couple extra hours to sleep it in. Actually, we cut your hours down because of daylight savings time, and that's why there's 76 people live on Zoom. And there's a lot of others out there, others listening on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, and YouTube. And so if you're listening to this on Facebook, we do Facebook on Sunday. So if you're listening to this on Facebook, you can hear this podcast as much as you want. You can binge listen. Just go to any of those platforms that
Stitcher
host.
is like one of the least used.
It's one of the least used, isn't it?
But
Stitcher is like,
but there's a lot of them. There's like 70 or more of them out there.
That are hosting podcasts.
Google Podcasts is a big one.
Oh, Google Podcasts.
Apple
Are we on Google
Podcasts is big,
Podcasts? Are we on
Yeah.
Google Podcasts?
Yeah.
Really?
But Stitcher, we get very little.
Well, you know what?
But it's a great name.
I'm
though,
not
Stitcher.
It's a good name. It sounds like the Bad Boys. The Bad Boys, a podcast. Yeah, we're Stitcher. And we have a special guest for you today. And he's a professor.
Mhm.
He's a professor, a Vaishnava professor. You can be a Vaishnava professor. But before we introduce Brighupada Prabhu, we have some secret announcements. Kaustubha.
Yes, I don't have the announcement. Mara has the announcement.
Mara.
Bhakti recovery group meetings today at 9:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's Eastern time, and we changed our clocks
That's
also.
right.
So
Gotta change the clock today.
Yep.
The Europeans did not change their clocks. They are not following protocol.
also,
Why don't we change the name of every one of their countries?
Don't get him going with that. Also, no show tomorrow, and we'll be on at 8 a.m. on Tuesday.
No show tomorrow
No show
Because-
tomorrow.
because you're traveling.
Secret story. Yes.
What? How are you traveling there? You're flying there? Oh, you're
What do you-
driving down.
I'm
to
flying
Jersey
I'm flying a swan.
but
My swan carrier will pick me up.
you're driving down to Jersey first. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Alright.
Traveling to Jersey. That thing about the pythons, huh? So interesting.
That
You know what people
pythons
do?
are-
They buy pythons as pets and then they let them go.
I don't think you've introduced
Florida happens to be the
Raghunath?
biggest breeding ground of python. They just like, it's their natural habitat,
Okay.
Florida. And then they just take over and they grow larger and larger and larger. And you're like living in the land of the lost.
I thought it was all
These
about alligators.
reptiles. They've already got alligators and crocodiles. It's like you're going back millennia.
You actually did research before going to Florida, and this is what you came up with. That there's a python. All right. I think we better move on. Let's get
Oh
this.
my God. If you're from Finland, you don't have to worry about stuff like that. Everything is civil up in Finland.
They have polar bears and things like that, maybe.
We just have wolves and reindeer.
You have
walking around.
reindeer? Oh, you do have reindeer, don't you?
But they don't
Brighupada,
hurt anyone.
welcome to the show, Brighupada Prabhu. It's nice to
Thank
meet you. And what is your professional name, sir? I'm sure they don't call you Professor Brighupada in the university, do they?
No, they call me Dr. Måns Broo, but
Oh.
Brighupada is fine. I'm very happy to be here. I'm honored to be here. All of my friends are here already, so finally I've been allowed on as well. So thank you.
All right.
Good
So
to
the
have
number one question I have, I'm going to pretty much back
Maybe
off.
we ought to start with a bio. Maybe we ought to
Yeah.
slow this down right now.
Well, very first question is, are you from the hardcore scene like everybody else from Finland?
Well, let's do the bio. This just slow it. Raghu?
Well, you think
Take your
hardcore is
time.
going to be in the bio?
No, it's definitely not in the bio. I have it right in front of me.
Okay.
Okay, Brighupada Prabhu is a senior lecturer at the Department of Comparative Religion in Åbo Akademi University in Finland.
Mm.
He was awarded the 2017 Donner Research Prize for his book, The Radha Tantra. And he's also the editor of the award-winning Finnish yoga magazine, Ananda.
Mm.
Are you familiar with Ananda, Raghunath?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
But I don't hang in Finland that much.
That's right. Is it Ananda in Finnish or in English? Or in another language?
It's in Finnish,
It's in Finnish.
It's in
yeah.
Finnish.
but the
Okay.
pictures are in English.
Okay, very good. And also, but Brighupada Prabhu has just recently written and published very important work. The Haribhaktivilāsa of Sanātana Gosvāmin. He's done a critical edition of this. It's recently been published and released. It's a very expensive book to buy, but it's available for free, right? The PDF of it online. So we'll share with everyone how they can access that. But we're really especially interested in talking about the Haribhaktivilāsa and what it means and how it relates to people like us. But before we get into that, Raghu has very important questions to ask regarding the hardcore world.
There's so many people that listen to this podcast on Zoom that are from Finland that are all connected to the Finland hardcore scene. Are you from the Finland hardcore scene, or do you know anything about it? Or are you purely a scholar that you don't even know what I'm talking about? You don't even know what hardcore is. Tell me, Brighupada Prabhu.
I've heard the word before, once or twice. No, unfortunately, I'm not from that scene, but some of my best friends are like Mohan Prabhu and others.
All right. Okay. All right. I thought he was from. Okay. And of course your wife, Saragrahi ji, she's an incredible artist and she's a regular on Zoom and and she did the incredible artwork for our Italy tote bag, which we love. It's a special edition, Wisdom of the Sages tote.
Yeah.
So big
And
shout
she's
out
coming.
to
She just
Saragrahi.
registered yesterday to come to our Italy retreat this summer.
Well, all right.
Yeah.
All right, Saragrahi, great.
So Brighupada Prabhu, then if it wasn't through hardcore, then how is it that you came to practice bhakti? Could you share just a little bit of background for us?
Well, I think I really came to bhakti through books, which makes sense. I don't know if you can see my background, but I've always loved books since I learned to read when I was 7. I came across a book of Prabhupada's at the summer course I was taking when I was a kid. I was 16 or something like that, and it was the book. The Science of Self-Realization, which is one of these kind of compilations of Prabhupada's letters and talks and discussions. Mm-hmm. And I loved it. I loved how straight Prabhupada was with his answers. I guess it was a bit hardcore, you could say. He would kind of skip around the questions when somebody asked something. He would say things as they were. Mm-hmm. And as a teenager, I really loved that. And then at the beginning of the book, there was this small note that if you're interested in the subject matter of the book, then you can correspond with the secretary at this address. And I don't know if anybody else actually ever did that, but I did that. I sent a letter to that address and I got a reply in 3-4 months or so.
Was this a Finnish translation or was it English?
It was actually a Swedish translation. We have 2 languages here in Finland, and I belong to the Swedish minority, so it was a Swedish book. But I got a reply then from the local temple, and they told me to come and visit. So I checked out the place. I walked past it once. I didn't dare go in. I went another day. I still didn't.
It's always a little scary to go in, it's sort of
It
like,
was super scary. But
super scary.
Third
Super
time
scary.
I managed to go in, and immediately they said, "Oh, are you Måns?" And I thought, wow, these people, they know how to read minds or something.
We've been waiting for you.
Yes. But of course, they were the ones who had answered the letter, and they
Right,
kind of
wow.
figured this boy is going to come at some point. So I really liked the way the devotees were. They believed in something. I didn't really understand exactly what it was, but they were so full of joy and so full of confidence, like walking around in bed sheets and being really kind of weird, but owning it and not being scared to live a lifestyle that was different from everybody else. And to me, that was so impressive.
Sure. Owning it. Walking around a
Yeah.
bed sheet is one thing. Walking around a bed sheet and owning it, that's
Exactly.
like dancing freely in a bed
Yeah.
sheet. That's something noble.
So once I was ready with school, I decided that I'm going to become a Hindu monk. This will be my last life in this material world.
Very good.
So I joined the ashram, thinking I'm going to stay there for the rest of my life. Oh, it didn't really work out like that. But I did stay in the ashram for a bit more than a year. And it was a very good experience for me as a young man. Learning many, not only kind of bhakti-related things, but also kind of life lessons as well. The kind of things that others maybe learn in other ways, but for me, it was a very good experience. Eventually, I decided living in the ashram wasn't really my thing. Not the rules per se, but I was curious about so many things. I wanted to study the scriptures, but also other things. I wanted to learn about other traditions and so on. So
Ashram living can be a bit constrictive with that. Their idea of what you should be doing.
Yeah, which makes total sense. That's what an ashram is about.
Sure.
But at that point of my life, I felt I wanted to kind of expand a little bit. So I moved out. I went to university, started studying religion, knowing that I wanted to specialize in Vaishnavism, because that's something I already had kind of a personal experience of, and I wanted to see, can I study this thing also from a different perspective? Can I look at what I found from kind of an outsider's perspective and perhaps bring those two together in some way? But I also realized quite soon that if I want to go deep in this, I'll have to learn Sanskrit. So I went over to Sweden for a couple of years and studied Sanskrit in Uppsala there, and then came back to Finland, went to India for some time as well, but mostly I've been here in Finland since then. So that's my kind of path to where I am in a nutshell.
Okay, very interesting. And so your research has most recently brought you to this very important text, the Haribhaktivilāsa. Could you give us some context of understanding what is this text? Where did it come from? What does it address?
Yes, actually, I've been interested in this text since I first started studying Sanskrit at the end of the 90s. It's a ritual text. It's what's in Sanskrit called a ritual nibandha. It means a compilation. So it's not just a manual that do this and do that, but it's a book that tries to show kind of the ideal life of the Vaishnava devotee, from how to get up from bed in the morning to how to build a temple. So it tries to kind of be universal in the sense of getting everything into there. And it does all of these things by referring to older texts. So about maybe 90% of the text is actually quotations from other texts. So in a sense, it's not very original, but the ways in which the author quotes these earlier texts and when he makes changes in them or introduces new things is very interesting. because this is one of the first texts in the Sampradaya or tradition of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it tries to give a picture of what this tradition of Krishna Bhakti should look like when it comes to kind of practical action. And it tries to present all of the new and sometimes quite radical ideas that this tradition has in a way that looks very traditional. So the book is in fascinating ways a meeting of tradition and innovation. On the surface of the book is extremely orthodox and traditional, but between the lines now and then you get these radical new things.
Interesting.
What was radical? What was radical?
Well, for example, the idea that these rituals can be performed not only, and now this is going to be shocking for some people.
Right.
These rituals are not only for Brahmins, and they're not only for men. Can you imagine? Even women can do these rituals. So this, of course, this is a no-brainer for us today, but we're speaking about the 16th century in India. And an extremely patriarchal society, extremely caste-conscious society, where your birth determined many things in your life. So the author of this book, he argues all the time, from the beginning to end, that what's central is your devotion to Krishna. Whether you're a man, a woman, something else, whether you're a Brahmin, an outcast, doesn't matter. What matters is that you're a devotee of Krishna, that you've been initiated as a devotee of Krishna. This is so radical in its own context that there are still some members of this tradition, still today in 2023, who disagree with this, something that was said more than 500 years ago.
Yeah, it seems so obvious to us in our culture of you can do anything, you can be anybody you want, but it is a very like rigid society, and it's very, very orthodox. And so what are the rest of the Hindu community at that time? What did they think about that? Was it like revolutionary, or like, yeah, of course? Did they completely accept this person? This person was obviously a great scholar. It was Sanātana Gosvāmin, great scholar, a great saint. Did they immediately accept him, or did it cause conflict, or was it sort of like the Martin Luther what was to the Catholic Church?
Well, it didn't cause conflict in that way, like violence and wars and things like that. But definitely it did cause conflict, even within the tradition itself, the tradition coming from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As I said, some people don't even accept it today. But mostly people did accept it. And the reason for that is that he presents all of these new and radical ideas in a very kind of traditional garb. So instead of saying, I believe this should be like this, he will say, according to the Brahmayamala, it is like this. And then he'll give a verse from that book. And then he'll cite the Bhagavata Purana, the Srimad Bhagavatam, which of course is the central text for the Gaudiya Vaishnavas. He's going to refer back to this text again and again. So he's kind of saying what he wants to say through all these ancient texts. And that's something that people could buy then.
You know, I'm wondering, let's just take like one step backwards for a second and give this just a bit more context to. Now, this is part of it. The Gaudiya Vaishnava lineage is kind of like, I guess you could say, a branch of an older branch, right? It's a branch that's branching off another branch of the Madhva lineage that goes back, for so many centuries. And but then it has this figure, Sri Chaitanya, who within the tradition is seen as Krishna himself coming in another form. Outsiders might say, okay, they had their big charismatic mystical figure that appeared at that time, and usually, as far as I understand, that those big figures that kind of become the heads of these lineages, they write their own books. They give their own interpretations of the ancient texts, and it's based on their writings that these lineages kind of expand from. But with Sri Chaitanya, if he didn't actually write these texts himself, he had his followers write them. One first question is, why is that? Was it just that he was just experiencing such intense devotional ecstasies himself that that's what he busied himself with?
Especially since he was a scholar and a pundit, you think he would write more?
That's a very good question. I think partly you answered it yourself, Kaustuv Prabhu. He was very much an ecstatic and a mystic. He did write a little bit in his youth and some verses here and there, but otherwise he deputed his followers to do so. And I think that's part of his greatness. Really, I mean, this is such a difficult thing often to do, to give over agency to others instead of just, I need to do everything because I'm the center of everything. Like, okay, you do this, you do this. And this group of scholar devotees who moved to Vrindavan in North India from Bengal, there's this group of men called the Six Goswamis. Most of them were Brahmins, not all of them. They were all disciples of Sri Chaitanya, and they worked together as a team, really creating the kind of literary foundation for the whole tradition. So that Rupa Goswami wrote, for example, on aesthetics, on bhakti. Sanātana Gosvāmin wrote this book Haribhaktivilāsa on ritual. Jiva Goswami wrote on theology and so on. So they worked quite clearly as a team. And this is something that I've seen in my own research as well. I've seen how, for example, some of the manuscripts that Sanātana Goswami, my author, has used in writing his book had been copied by Rupa Goswami, his brother. So they really worked together and had this vision that let's create texts on these different aspects of bhakti that will then kind of work as a group of texts
that were establishing a new movement within an old tradition.
Yes, because even though the tradition is formally linked with the Madhva tradition, in many ways it's a new tradition with a new emphasis on what the understanding of God is, the understanding of how to approach God, the understanding of the ultimate goal. Many of these things are quite different in this tradition of Chaitanya compared to the older Madhva tradition.
Now, this actually, the way that you described the book earlier, just a few minutes ago, saying that he was presenting innovation, but kind of garbing it in ancient traditional references. That just saying that, I think, has helped me understand it a lot, even already. Because let's put this in a broader context. There's something Raghunath and I talk about a lot, and that we feel that bhakti is destined to kind of just like become much more, globally popular.
I thought you were going to say Seinfeld. Okay, good. Yes.
I think it was Seinfeld.
Yes.
But
Bhakti is going to be global. That's what we're talking about.
But that it has too many good answers to the questions about life in the way that it presents it. Theologically, it's beautiful and fascinating, and it makes so much sense. Philosophically, socially, it has so many answers to the problems that plague us through its spiritual insights and so on. And then there's so much beauty in the culture. And so we kind of feel like, yeah, this is destined to happen. And if we go back, back centuries in India, we see kind of a movement that's going from, I suppose, and you can share with me if you feel like I'm characterizing this well, but you have this Brahminical orthodoxy, like you had these ancient texts that were kind of for the privileged classes to really go deep into, and a philosophy that was less personal, let's say, And as the centuries were passing, very important bhakti figures in bhakti would become prominent. And if you go back like 500 years, it seems that there was a wave of bhakti that swept all over India, in all of the different regions of India with different flavors. And at this time, texts were provided that weren't just in Sanskrit, but that were in the local vernaculars, so that it became much more available. You know, these teachings and the stories and so on became much more popularized. And as this shift is going on, the tension between like Brahminical orthodoxy and like just like simple devotion, you know, like on the scale, like this simple devotion becomes more valued than the Brahminical orthodoxy. And I see like the way that bhakti spreads around the globe is it's kind of still moving more in that direction. And so 500 years ago, you have Sri Chaitanya, he orders Sanātana Gosvāmin to write about the rituals that are performed by the Bhakti-yogi. And you have Sanātana Gosvāmin, who's kind of like pushing, and you please tell me if you feel this is the way that you see it. He's kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. He's expanding who can practice this and how they can understand it. And not only that, but like what is important? You know, what is most important to keep in mind? What's the main thing here that we're trying to focus on? And so he's presenting a book that externally appears like a book about Orthodox ritual, but there are messages that are being conveyed in it that are really there to expand, deepen our understanding of it, and expand our who and how we can practice it. Do you see it something like that?
Yes, definitely. I think you're onto something important here. At the same time, I do think that when Sanātana Gosvāmi writes this book, he really is personally also interested in all of these rituals.
Yeah.
He's not doing all of them. And that's something that's important to realize when reading a book like this. This is not a description of historical reality. The way the rituals are described in this book is always starting out with the ideal. So, for example, when he describes the ritual of initiation, which of course is the ritual of inducting a person into this tradition and giving that person one or several mantras for use in meditation and in worship, he starts out describing an amazing ritual that goes on for 3 days, where you construct this pavilion with all the details are given, what kind of materials to use and the directions, and you create this beautiful mandala inside, you make a fire pit for offerings. Then the guru and the disciple, they sleep there in this area in the night, and then depending on what kind of dreams the disciple has, you know something about how the spiritual life is going to be. Okay. Then there's all these rituals. It goes on for 3 days. And then he says, and if you can't do like this, then you can do in this way. And then he describes more or less the same, but for a 1-day ritual. And then he says, and if you can't do this, then do this. And then he gives yet another simplified version. And then he says, and if you can't do this, then just let the guru whisper the mantra into the ear of the disciple, and that's initiation. Mm. So he'll always start out with the kind of ideal, the way things are described in the ancient books for a person who has the means, who has the time, and then he will kind of scale back to more real things. And this is how things are done everywhere in the Indian texts. If you study the Yoga Sutra, for example, which of course you have, you know that Patanjali kind of starts out with the advanced practitioners in the first chapter. And then in the beginning of the second chapter, he when he comes to Kriya Yoga, he's going to speak about the intermediate practitioner. Mm-hmm. And then he says, but yeah, anyway, if you're a beginner, then let's take yet another step back and start with the yoga, with the 8th yoga. So this is typical for Indian texts of essence. No, he doesn't, because he wants to kind of show how to do things in the most kind of beautiful way as the first, because he's an optimist. He's thinking people have the means, they have the interest, they want to do it in this way, let them do like that. So and he's also interested in the details. In many places, he really gets deep into how seemingly simple things are done, like, for example, these kind of hand gestures. And he'll present several different alternatives for like, you suppose the hands like at one point like this. So he's really kind of up.
You're breaking up a little bit on us, I think.
Okay, I'll try to.
You were saying about mudras, but it got a little bit broken up.
Yeah. I was just giving the mudras as an example of the ways in which he's really enjoying the details and enjoying kind of this world of ritual. Because, and I think this is an important thing. Today many of us are thinking that rituals are external, that bhakti is about the heart. Mm-hmm. And of course it is about the heart in the most important way. But at the same time, we are embodied beings. Just
we got cut off again. You're saying that
whatever,
it is about the heart. I'm sorry.
From the bhakti perspective. Okay.
I'm sorry. We got again. It broke up a little bit on us. But you were saying that bhakti ultimately it's about the heart, but
yeah.
I switched off your Wi-Fi.
That Finnish internet, Kostuba.
I tell you, a reindeer interfering with this.
Do you think it would help if people turned off their videos on Zoom?
Oh, I don't know. It might help. Why don't we try it?
Because we're sitting on the edge of our seat, Brighupada Dasa.
Yeah, if everyone could please.
We do the mudras or not?
Am I there? Am I there?
Yeah, you're here. And what we're doing is we're asking everybody on Zoom to turn off their video, so that might help the signal.
Okay.
So please continue. You're saying that devotion is most important, yet.
Yes, I was saying devotion is key, of course, but devotion is not just something that is done with the heart. Devotion is something where we can use the whole human experience. We can use the body as well. And that really is where the strength of bhakti, that in bhakti we can use the full human experience. We can use the body, we can use our hands, we can use our words, we can integrate our whole being into our devotional life.
Well, this is, I think, interesting. And let's try to bring it down to the level of like our listeners and ourselves, like how we practice. Historically, we see that Sri Chaitanya, he not only ordered these six Goswamis to write books, but he also asked them to establish temples in Vrindavan. And really grant, like, for instance, the Radha Govindaji temple in Vrindavan is like this massive, cavernous, incredible temple. But historically, it wasn't long before those temples were desecrated and attacked by invaders. And those temples were moved, the deities within the temples were moved, many of them to Jaipur or other nearby places. And perhaps because of this, there was a greater emphasis on just chanting and less on ritual, and a lot of the important figures in the lineage were Babajis, where men living in a loincloth and sleeping under a different tree every night, or living on the banks of Radhakund. But the Goswamis did establish these temples, and they did write books like Haribhaktivilāsa that have a lot to do with ritual and how to practice it well. For someone like ourselves, our listeners, how do you see, what is the importance of the temple, right, in the practice of our bhakti, or in the transformation of our internal life? Why do these external rituals, or even external forms like the deities in the temple, what importance do they play in our internal life?
Thank you. I think this is a very important question. The books like Haribhaktivilāsa were actually written exactly for us, for people living in the world, not for renunciates. That's explicitly said in the book. Because I think rituals is a very practical way of transforming our life. Bhakti, to me, is very much about transformation.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada, he uses this wonderful word dovetailing. I don't know if anybody else actually uses that word in the same way, but like you doing our ordinary things, but connecting them with Krishna. So when, for example, in the Haribhaktivilāsa, there's talk about the temple, that can mean a wonderful temple like the Radha Govinda temple, but usually it means the temple in the home. So the idea is that every devotee will live in a temple. And that's an extremely powerful practice when you make your home into a temple. If you make, like you're sitting there with your altar just behind you, Kaustubh Prabhu, and that means that you're not just living in a home, just in an ordinary house. You're living in a temple. So when you're cooking, you're not cooking for yourself. You're cooking for God. When you're cleaning, everybody needs to clean their house. You're not actually cleaning your house. You're cleaning Krishna's temple. All the things that you're doing there, you're doing for Krishna, provided, of course, you're conscious of that. So that's an extremely powerful way of spiritualizing our whole life, not just the 1 hour we sit or meditate or when we read a spiritual book or something. We can actually make our whole life a spiritual life. And I think that's key, because many people have this misconception that we have a spiritual life and then we have an ordinary life. Ritual can make our, so to speak, ordinary life part of our spiritual life. So that's why I think rituals are important for us as practitioners, especially for those of us who are not living in a loincloth under a different tree every day. And of course, we need to to read the text kind of in an intelligent way, like you hinted at earlier. We won't be able to do all the rituals in the same way that it's described in the book, but that's also not intended or expected. Again, the book presents an ideal picture of the perfect devotional life, but that's a life that hardly anybody has ever lived. For example, in the book, it says that after you've finished all of your rituals in the morning, then it's noon, and then you do your noon rituals.
Okay.
And then when you've finished with your noon rituals, then you can engage in your livelihood for an hour or two in the afternoon.
If only we're like that for most people.
Yeah. And the best type of livelihood, there's two different alternatives. So now you can choose which one you're going to do. One is to live off old money. That's actually the best, because then that money is
to live off
old money, like money that you've inherited or you've married into.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of karma free. Somebody else has already paid the karma for that money. So that's alternative one. The other alternative is to live off donations from qualified students.
And Raghunath will make a pitch for Patreon. This is a listener-supported podcast.
So obviously, this is not very real for most of us. So instead of kind of thinking, all right, okay, so this is not for me, then realizing again, this book is presenting the ideal. So I'll pick some of the rituals from here and here, and I'll modify them in such a way that they are realistic for me and the kind of life that I live.
And that's the role a guru could play in one's life too, helping you modify these for your own life.
Yes, definitely. Guru, and also your peers.
Mm-hmm.
The word bhakti, one of the kind of basic meanings of bhakti is sharing. And I think this is important, and it's something that comes out in this text as well all the time, that bhakti is about community, about doing things together. So it's not just you and your Krishna, but it's you and all of your friends, all of your relatives, your whole community doing bhakti together. And then sometimes Raghunath is going to say, come on, be realistic. Sometimes Kaustubh is going to say, do a little bit more, and so on. So we kind of support each other. We sometimes say, this doesn't make sense, and so forth. We're doing these things together.
Mm-hmm. Oh, very interesting.
Can I ask a couple questions to the professor? Brighupada Prabhu, so glad to have you here. Can you zoom out a little bit? And it seems historically, maybe explain the context of what's going on in India. They are being sort of dominated by basically colonists, invaders have taken over the country. And then you have this place of Vrindavan where it seems like it's not just Chaitanya and his people, but there's all these other great masters. There's Haribhaktivilāsa, there's Vallabhacharya, there's Haridas Swami. These are all like great, devotee, historical figures that have big lineages going on. What is happening, and how is it related? And are they being oppressed, or are they doing is this an underground movement going on? Is it the middle of the jungle and no one's paying attention to them? Or it seems like the Six Goswamis of Chaitanya's people, they're working with the Muslim government at the time. Can you explain historically where we're at and what's going on, both spiritually and materially?
Thank you. Yes, this is an excellent question. Some of the Goswamis, they had been working with the Muslim government in Bengal, and we kind of have a false dichotomy, I think, about things going on in India in this era. Some people think that we have the good Hindus and we have the bad Muslims, but of course it's not like that. Many of Sri Chaitanya's followers were working for the government in different ways, and that wasn't considered to be a problem in most ways.
For the Muslim government.
For the Muslim government, yes. But in some places it was. The area around Vrindavan itself and the area around that had been really oppressed by Muslim rulers for centuries before this, with all ancient temples being destroyed and then rebuilt, destroyed again, and so forth. So the situation had just changed here, just a few decades before the Goswamis come to Vrindavan. But when they come, there's a new situation. There's a new ruler, Akbar, up in Delhi, and in Agra, nearby, and he's much more open to Hindu kind of public religiosity than some other Muslim rulers had been. So they really make use of this favorable political situation. And as you say, we have other Vaishnavas doing the same at the same time. We sometimes get the impression that Vrindavan was just a jungle when they came there, but that's not really the case. There were already some settlements. Sanātana Gosvāmin, he was cooperating with other Vaishnavas. This is a time when the kind of sectarian divisions that later become so prominent weren't really in place yet. There was more camaraderie between different Vaishnavas, partly because there were not that many of them, but also partly because they kind of had this common idea, let's explore this land, this sacred land, let's recover it, let's see what kind of treasures we can find here. And these kind of common ideas also of exploring different ways of relating to Krishna in a very intimate way, not just as this majestic Lord of the spiritual world, but can I love God as my child, as my friend, as my lover, and so on. So these are ideas that unify these different bhakti saints in the Vrindavan area. And it's something that's very interesting for the Goswamis as well. But they also want to explore the ritual side. And it's interesting, as Kaustubh said just now, that this ritual side was kind of broken, because then when the political situation changes and we have other Muslim emperors then who are not so favorable towards the Hindus, some of these temples, they get destroyed, and the tradition kind of retreats from that more kind of public aspect. And to me, this is very interesting, because it tells us something about how bhakti is always tied up with the world and also with politics. It's going to take different forms at different times. And that's something bhakti has always done. The so-called liberals are going to take bhakti in a particular direction. The more conservative are going to take bhakti in another direction. And that's fine. We can have different types of bhakti in the world.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, it is a great point. In the same way it existed in the Soviet Union, as opposed to New York City, as opposed to New Delhi. I have a burning question, Kaustubh, I really want to ask, and I think you'll find it quite interesting too. It's got nothing to do with hardcore. Who coined the verses as the shikshastikam? Because obviously it wasn't Lord Chaitanya. So there are these prayers, these prayers that they say is the only written things by Lord Chaitanya. That's how it's publicly explained. But from what I understand, it's like I don't think Lord Chaitanya actually left them himself. Like, did someone later coin these? These are the important teachings. Where are they from?
Well, we don't know that exactly. We do know that the first time these verses are cited is in a book called Padyavali by my author's younger brother Rupa Goswami, which is a collection of verses. That's what Padyavali means. And there you'll find these 8 verses in different places. So they're not presented as a whole, but on different topics. And one of those verses is also cited in the Haribhaktivilāsa. The first time they are cited as a unity is in Krishna Das Kaviraja Goswami's Chaitanya Charitamrita, which is about 1605 or something like that. So a little bit later. But it may be, of course, that they were understood to be kind of a unity even before that. But that's the first time that they are that we have kind of hard evidence for them being seen as a unified whole.
Kaustubh, back to you. I thought that was sort of an interesting. I've always been on my mind.
We don't have much time left, but I just thought an interesting question would be your scholarship in this particular text. You call this a critical edition, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could explain a bit about that and explain a bit about how digging into this text the way that you have, how it's on one level you're doing it as a scholar, but on another level you're a practitioner, and how engaging with this ancient text and other texts related to it, how that's affected you as a practitioner.
Thank you. For me, it's been extremely interesting in many ways. For me, bhakti really is about how we live our lives and what kind of things we do. Sometimes we tend to become too theoretical when we speak about bhakti, but I think it's important to kind of make bhakti real, that what does bhakti actually lead to? And one of the most amazing things in my life, and I have many things to be thankful for, not the least my wonderful wife, but another very amazing thing in my life is that I'm able to work with this text, and a text which I find intellectually stimulating, but also very interesting in the way that it brings me close to the Goswamis, and I can see how they were working, what kind of books they were using, how they were cooperating with other Vaishnavas. I've been able to hold in my hand some texts written by the Goswamis themselves. So in different ways, I've been able to get quite close to the Goswamis, I feel, in my own little way. And that's quite exciting for me. And I've also found some things that others hadn't found before, like some verses that have been dropped in the text. When the text is called a critical edition, it means that what I've done is I've gone back to the handwritten copies of the text.
Wow!
Try to reconstruct the original form of the text, because the book itself was printed the first time in the 19th century, and in the years there in between, it had been copied and copied many times by hand, and some things had been dropped off, and some other things had been added to the text. So the idea of a critical edition is to reconstruct the original text, but also show the ways the text have changed. And that's quite interesting, because some of the changes, for example, have to do with understandings of the Guru and how this understanding have changed throughout the centuries. So through the text, I've also been able to zoom in on some of the kind of dynamics going on in the history of the tradition.
So a lot of it is almost like detective work, just kind of.
It's like detective work.
Yes.
It's like searching for treasures. I mean,
Yes.
what is it like to go through these old, what are they on? They're on palm leaves written in Sanskrit?
They're actually on paper.
Paper? What's
Kind of a
paper?
country-made paper. Some are in palm leaf as well, but the problem with palm leaf is that it's very, very brittle and it doesn't last more than maybe 100 years at most. So the oldest manuscripts I've been able to see are actually paper manuscripts.
Not the original manuscripts, but some.
No,
the copies.
the so-called autograph, or the author's own manuscript, has been lost. But I've seen some other texts written by my author Sanātana Gosvāmin.
Yeah, on palm leaf.
On paper.
Okay, he was also.
When
using
did they
paper.
invent paper?
Well, a
Around
bit
long time
earlier.
ago.
That's actually something that the Muslims bring to India, paper and better technology for making paper.
Well, all right.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the paper contribution.
Prabhu, if people would like to read your book, how can they find it? Where should they look?
Are you on Instagram?
No, I'm not, but they can Google Haribhaktivilāsa and Måns Broo, and they'll find it on the publisher's homepage. It's published by an academic publisher called Brill.
Brill, yeah.
Brill.
It's
Okay,
in open access thanks to the generosity of my university library.
Excellent. So anyone can pick it up and read it.
Incredible. I could talk to him all day. Brighupada, I could talk to you all day, Prabhu. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for having me.
We really appreciate it. Mara?
Yeah, we want to thank Brighupada Prabhu for joining us, and everybody from Finland who joins us on a regular basis. I don't know how we have such a great Finland connection, but they're here every day. Thanks to everybody joining us on Zoom. Join us on Zoom as well. Just email Mara, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com. She'll give you the secret codes to enter into our little coven. Woo! special. No show tomorrow, everybody. And show will be at 8 a.m. on Tuesday, New York time, because there's traveling going on. We'll share that with you then. We're going to announce the Wisdom of the Sages retreat happening at Super Soul Farm. Special guest, Satchidananda Swami. Excited for that.
Oh, I thought you were going to announce that today.
I thought I was gonna. I'm gonna wait till Tuesday. Keep them eager. Woo! And also the Wisdom of the Sages retreat in Italy. Also, Satchidananda Swami is going to come to that as well. We're doing a lot with Maharaj. He's even coming on my pilgrimage.
Down to Florida with you?
No, not coming to Florida to see my mom, but on our pilgrimage in India, right before Kartik and right when we get to Vrindavan, we're going to be with Satchidananda Swami as well. You know what we did this time, Kostuba? We cleaned the entire Haridev Mandir, and then we lit candles and that just kirtan. It was like incredible. Cleaning the Mandir of the heart. We want to thank Brighupada Prabhu for being with us. Incredible. And we're going to leave that as info on the show notes. And keep doing what you're doing, Prabhu. And I'm looking forward to hanging out with you in person one day. It will get him to come to Italy with us. Huh?
That'd be nice.
I got a million questions for you, but I didn't want to keep butting in. But that was great. I felt like I could have just I promised I would be back off because I felt like a little intimidated. But at the same time, it's like all these questions came up, especially about what Vrindavan was like and all these swamis, and where we got all these prayers to Lord Chaitanya. Where did we get the Panchatattva Mahamantra? Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Lord Chaitanya didn't make that up. I know someone's going to say it's eternal. I get that. But where did it actually come from? Right?
Jagannath Das Babaji.
Huh?
Jagannath Das Babaji. That's where it comes.
Really?
Yeah.
Of whom you are the namesake.
Wait, Jagannath Das Babaji?
Oh, Jagannath Das Babaji. Okay, I think you said Raghunath Das. Jagannath Das Babaji. Interesting.
Very interesting. All right, we got more. We've got more. We've got to have part 2 of this, Prabhu. I want to thank everybody for making this happen. And that's it. Everybody, hands in the air. Clap your hands.